Hello and welcome to Salibo Football. Today we're going to be predicting the outcome of the Copa America. Couldn't find a way to predict every game, so we're just going to use this simple, easy Copa America 2024 predictor. Tournament starts in a little under 2 hours, so waited till the very last minute, make sure I got all the updates. I'm sporting my Messi jersey from the U.S., so I'll be cheering for the U.S., but got a rep tonight, Argentina, Canada, and those are the two teams that we're getting started with. So without further ado, let's get right into it. It's pretty easy to start off with. With Group A, we're talking about Argentina. They're the world champions. They're also the leader in current Conembol World Cup qualifying standings, and they're the holder of the Copa America as of right now. They've got great players across the board. Lionel Messi and Di Maria could be their last international tournament, but you've also got new stars pushing through the ranks. Enzo Fernandez, Lisandro Martinez, Christian Romero in the back line, alongside Enzo Fernandez in midfield. You've got Alexis McAllister. DePaul's been there for a while, but he's great. And then up top, obviously, you got Julian Alvarez to complement Lautaro Martinez. There's just a lot of talent on this team across the board. Emi Martinez in goal. The outside backs, Acuna, he's amazing. So this Argentinian team is really well built, really well coached as well. Lionel Scaloni is a tremendous coach. And what they've been able to do, turning around this program from a team that, in the 2018 World Cup, the last tournament before back-to-back trophies for this Argentinian team, where they, struggled through the group, lost a game to Croatia, tied a game with Iceland, and had to beat Nigeria on the final day to qualify through. And then in a game that was really high scoring, looked really close in the scoreboard, they really did get trounced by France. Took a late goal to make it 4-3. It was really 4-2. And without an absolute banger from Angel Di Maria, it's 4-1. So they were really poor before Scaloni took over. And since then, it's been a different story. And I think there's a real reason why. And I just think the way that Scaloni has coached this team has worked for them. I think that he is the right manager for this team, and it shows in the results. Going into the World Cup, they were on pace to beat the record that Italy recently set for most consecutive wins. They would have done so in the World Cup if it weren't for the fact that they lost their first group stage game to Saudi Arabia. They've just been fantastic. In qualifying so far, they've only got the one loss, 0 draws, 6 games, 5 wins. They have a +6 in the goal differential. So they've just been really good. So the rest of this group is really going to need to put in a shift, because realistically, for me, this group is 3 teams trying to get second place, because Argentina's going to win. So moving into those teams fighting for that second place, let's go in the order it has here. Canada is what it has currently right there. Canada's got some really talented players when you look at them. Jonathan David was a guy that was, he might be the best number 9 in CONCACAF right now. I think certain USMNT fans would disagree, but he's a tremendous player. And then you've got maybe the best player in all of CONCACAF right now in Alphonso Davies, who's been doing numbers at Bayern Munich for years now. Problem with them is making the World Cup seemed like a really big accomplishment for them. And they went into the tournament with medium expectations. I think they were just excited to be there, but they lost every game and they crashed out in the group stage, and they fired their coach. And since then, the FA has had some issues. Issues where players don't like the accommodations, the payment, coaching staff has been in and out, and it's just a dysfunctional federation right now. It's hard to look at Canada going into the 2026 World Cup and say that this is not an important tournament. They need to show up, and they need a coaching staff to show up, and they need a group of players to show up like they haven't since they topped CONCACAF qualifying for the last World Cup. And so they've got a lot of work to do to prove that they're still that same team. On the other hand, moving on to this third team, Chile, right now they sit 8th place in Conembol qualifying. 6 games played. They've got just the one win, 2 draws, 3 losses. And yet I look at them and I see a team that I actually do think has promise. They've just signed a new coach who is tremendous for them. Their last 3 games in lead up to this tournament in March, they played 2. They lost to France 3-2 in a game that was really well played by Chile. I mean, if you can keep it 3-2 with that French team, that's sensational. Before that, they beat Albania 3-0, an Albanian side who just tied Croatia yesterday in the Euros. And then their most recent game was against Paraguay, a really stout defensive team who currently sits just ahead of Chile in Conembol qualifying. They beat them 3-0. And that's a team that in Conembol qualifying so far has only allowed 3 goals. And Chile just scored 3 on them in a friendly leading up to this tournament. So I think their FA, unlike Canada, Canada were on this upward trend going into the World Cup. And since then, I think it's been downhill. And Chile, have really struggled since the back-to-back Copa Americas they won in 2015 and 2016. They didn't go to the 2018 World Cup. They didn't go to the 2022 World Cup. And after what seemed like a really strong golden generation, they've kind of fell flat. But new leadership, new coaching has brought in kind of a new wave for them. Younger players are starting to come through, and you've still got some of these older guys in there, like Alexis Sanchez, who's been playing really well for them recently. So I think there's a lot of look up for Chile. And moving on to that 4th team, Peru, it's tough. I think they're the worst team in Conembol right now. I mean, they sit in 10th place. They've got 0 wins in their 6 qualifiers so far, 2 draws, 4 losses. They've scored 1 goal so far, and they've allowed 8. I mean, that's not really good numbers. They haven't looked promising. And that Peruvian side that made it to the World Cup in 2018, that was a lot of pride for them. And they looked really good at times. But I don't think that's a team that's there anymore. A team that, in that tournament were really shocked people and surprised people with how progressive they played, how they pressed, how they, constantly were in the other team's face and putting them up against it. I don't think that's the team anymore. And so when you look at the shape out of this group, I really think that Argentina will win all of their games. I think there's potential that they drop points in one of them, but if they play the way they should win every single one of these group stage games. And it comes down to, for me, I think Peru is going to finish last. I think Argentina is going to finish first. And it comes down to a Canada side who is struggling at the moment, despite the fact that they have found form in recent time, and a Chile side who has, despite the fact that they haven't been in form for many years now, are finding form all of a sudden under a new coach, which is why I'm going to go with what some people might consider with a surprising pick here. I'm going to put Chile in second and Canada in third. And I think what it would come down to for me, I think Argentina, 9 points. I think Chile I'm going to have with 4. Losing to Argentina, tying Canada, and beating Peru. And then I think Canada I'm going to have with 2 points, tying Chile and tying Peru. And then Peru in last place with 1 point just from the tie with Canada and a loss to Chile and Argentina. So that's Group A done. And that brings us to an interesting group, Group B here. Group B might be the one group in this tournament that doesn't have a standout top Conembol team. They've got Ecuador, who currently sit in 5th place in qualifying, but they've been really good recently. In their 6 qualifying games, they've got 3 wins, 2 draws, and just a 1 loss, 5 goals for, and only 3 against. They've been really good defensively, and they have the likes of Moises Caicedo in there to really solidify themselves. They've got a solid back line. At their previous recent results, in June, they've beaten Honduras 2-1. They've beaten Bolivia 3-1. They had a 1-0 close loss on the 9th of June to Argentina. And then going back to March, 2-0 against Guatemala. The last time they really looked poor, though, they played a 2-0 game with Italy. So it's interesting. I don't really know how to feel about it because, like I said, they've only got 1 loss in Conembol qualifying so far. But they also have lost to Argentina. It was a close game, lost to Italy 2-0. And then besides that, they haven't really played anybody. I'd like to think that they're a solid side. And honestly, the fact that they're ahead of Brazil in qualifying, I think is really interesting to look at. The performance that they had at the World Cup was absolutely sensational. They almost made it out of the group if it weren't for that loss to Senegal. So I think they have a lot of potential moving forward. I think the problem with them is there's a lot of unknowns. I don't think they really have figured everything out yet. Um, so I think it's difficult to say where this team is going to finish. And I think that's the case with a lot of teams in this group. This Jamaican side, very similar in that they're confusing. Um, they've got Leon Bailey. He's not going to play. He's not going to the tournament. And so when you're talking about another argument for the best player in all of CONCACAF, he's not even going to be at the tournament. Um, their recent performance against the United States in the CONCACAF Nations League was really promising, despite the fact that they lost. They were leading 1-0 in stoppage time and an own goal, tied it for the U.S., and then the U.S. won it in overtime eventually. But, that's a Jamaican side that hasn't really played that much. And I think they surprised the U.S. because they came out with what was supposed to be a Jamaican B team, and they played better than the Jamaican A side because for once it was Jamaicans who seemed to actually be proud of playing for their country. Some guys in the past, like Leon Bailey, Jamaica's FA has had a lot of problems similar to what I said with Canada with paying players, the accommodations that the players get, the travel fees, like what the travel's like, what hotels you're staying in. It hasn't always been an easy thing to be on the Jamaican team, and sometimes I'm sure that makes it difficult to play with pride. Leon Bailey has previously retired from the Jamaican national team because of this. So again, despite the fact that they've had some promise recently, it's hard to say where they're really at. So yeah, Jamaica, they're a hard team to talk about, but Mexico might be even harder to talk about. The giants of CONCACAF for years and years and years. Um, they've fallen off their perch. I mean, I think the U.S. has clearly surpassed them. They haven't beaten the U.S. Since before the first Nations League final, which was 2021. So it's been a while, at least 3 years since the last time Mexico got a result against the U.S. team that in themselves is not world beaters. A U.S. team that was happy to get a draw with England at the World Cup. I mean, that was considered a good result for them. I think that the Mexican FA has done the right thing. They've gone a lot younger in the squad that they've pulled up for this Copa, which I think is important because guys like Chucky Lozano, who isn't going to be there, might not have the right attitude going into this tournament. When you're a team that's been struggling for form recently, I think you have to try and get younger. You have to try and change. You have to try and adapt. You have to figure out the problems, and you have to address them. And sometimes veteran stars of the past, don't necessarily want to change, or they're not at the age where they can change and adapt into a new and younger squad. So I think it's smart to leave some of the older stars at home. Obviously they didn't leave everybody, but Memo Ochoa is not going, Chucky Lozano is not going, Raul Jimenez is not going. And those are some big names for Mexican fans over the last few years. Of course, Chucky scored at the World Cup in 2018 against Germany, a famous goal for them. So questionable decisions by them, but I think it's going to be the right decisions for them moving forward. The question is it going to produce results at this tournament? And then we come to Venezuela, who, looking at this group, might be the weakest team on paper. But when you look at current Conembol standings in qualifying, they sit fourth, 6 games, 2 wins, 3 draws, and a loss. It is very similar to Ecuador. In fact, I'm not quite sure why they're ahead of Ecuador. 2 wins, 3 draws, and a loss, by my counting, would put them at 9 points, which is where they sit. Ecuador, on the other hand, they've got 3 wins, which would already put them at 9 points, plus 2 draws, which would put them at 11. For some reason, they sit at 8, so I don't know if they had a punishment that gave them a points deduction in qualifying. But, Venezuela has been up there. I mean, they have more points than Brazil so far in World Cup qualifying for 2026. So when you look at their recent results, they didn't play any games in June to warm up for this Copa. Their last two games were against a Guatemalan side that's not at this Copa from the Concacaf Federation. They tied 0-0 with Guatemala, and then before that, they played a good game against Italy 2-1. But this is an Italian side that did not play a full lineup. I mean, Chiesa started, Fratesi started, and looking at the lineup, that's about it. As far as Di Lorenzo was in there and Donnarumma was in there. Those four are really the only four who have been getting starting minutes at the Euros that started in that game for Italy against Venezuela. So in my mind, I don't know if that's a game that Italy even took too seriously, and they beat Venezuela 2-1. So again, this Venezuelan side, they sit high in Conembol qualifying, but what really have they done? So it's another team that's hard to pick. And so when I say all this, because I think this group is going to be really hard to predict for anybody. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say Venezuela is going to finish last. And I think Jamaica is going to finish in third, not first. And Ecuador is going to win the group. And I think Mexico is going to finish second. I don't think that this young Mexican side is going to be good enough to win the group outright, but I don't think that a Mexican side is going to crash out in the group stages of a tournament 2 times in a row, as they did in the World Cup. I don't think they're going to do it in this Copa America. Ecuador, on the other hand, they were really promising at the World Cup. They also went out in the group stages, but I think they were just very happy to be there. And then the performances were really good. 2-0 win against Qatar. And then they played solidly against the Netherlands and Senegal. And there were times where, on paper, they were set to qualify during that game against Senegal. It didn't end up being the case. But, on that final day, they went into it with a chance. And if not for a Kalidou Koulibaly goal, it's an Ecuador side that goes through to the knockout sides and faces England in the round of 16, which is, just as much as the U.S. men's national team were able to accomplish. So it's really interesting. I'm going to go with Ecuador first. I think they have the experience enough to win this group. This is not a particularly tough group in a sense that there is no outright decided team that's going to be really tough to play. But I think everybody's going to play each other tough. I'm not going to predict Ecuador to have 9 points, maybe 5. Maybe Mexico has 5 as well. Maybe Jamaica has 2. Maybe Venezuela has none. I don't know. I'm just spitballing here, but if I'd have to guess, this would be the way that I'd have it shaping out. But I think it would be a good tournament. I think all of these teams have the potential to have a good tournament. And I think if the tournament ends up with these standings, at least 3 of the teams would be happy with the results from the group. So let's move on to the third group. That's going to be Group C with my national team, the U.S. men's national team. We'll talk about them last. First, we're going to talk about Bolivia. Not much to talk about with them either, similar to Peru from before, except Bolivia don't really have a history as Peru does. They sit currently 9th, just one game behind, or one spot ahead of Peru in Conembol qualifying, but they have a -10 goal differential currently. They've only scored 4 times and they've allowed 14 goals. And unfortunately for Bolivia, this is a group where you don't want to be allowing goals like that because the U.S. and Uruguay have really, really good attacks that I think can punish them. Panama, they're in a good run of form recently. They performed really well in the Nations League, in the Gold Cup. They beat the United States B team in the semifinals, but they made it to the finals of a Gold Cup. So things are looking up for this Panama side, especially, qualifying for the next World Cup is up. We're going from 32 teams at that next World Cup to 48. And I think this is a Panama side that can almost guarantee that they will have one of the 3 spots left out of 6 for CONCACAF teams. Obviously, the U.S., Canada, and Mexico as hosts have already qualified. That takes 3 away. But then there are still 3 spots plus a playoff spot for CONCACAF. And I would say, Panama, Costa Rica, and Jamaica would feel solid in getting those top 3 spots. And then, there's still a playoff spot that any of those 3 could fall back on. So things are looking up for Panama. you know, and like I said, that Gold Cup performance really good. They did end up losing to Mexico in the final, um, but I think things are looking up for them. However, with the difficulty of this group, I don't know if this is the tournament for them. And as I say that, I think Uruguay is currently the second best team in Conebol, and that's what World Cup qualifying says. They only sit behind Argentina. They have 4 wins, 1 draw, 1 loss. So they have 1 less win than Argentina and 1 more tie than them. They're literally just 2 points behind them. Their goal differential is the exact same, and they've got extremely talented players across the board. Darwin Nunez. I would say probably the best player on the team, the key player to the team, is going to be Federico Valverde, the Real Madrid midfielder. I think Uruguayans would agree with me. I think he's sensational, and I think he's going to dictate the pace for this Uruguay team. But when you look at their recent form, it's just terrific. I accidentally clicked on Argentina. I got it. I got the standings up next to me so I can reference them. Obviously, I'm sure everybody knew about the 4-0 thrashing of Mexico, which, considering how leveled over the years Mexico and the U.S. have been, that's a statement win going into the group. And then obviously their current standing in Conebol qualifying. The last World Cup was really disappointing for them. They didn't make it out of the group. They were in a group with Portugal, Korea, themselves, and Ghana. And Korea and Portugal were the 2 that made it through, and Uruguay was sent home in the group, which for them, as a team that's won 2 World Cups and is tied for the most Copa America wins of all time, I think that's really disappointing for them. So I think they'll be looking at this tournament with a lot of attention, a lot of intrigue. They want to make a statement here, and I think they have the ability to do so. And I think their recent form in World Cup qualifying shows that they're ready for this. They've gotten younger. Cavani's not at the tournament. They called up Suarez. I don't think he's going to play very much. I think this is a really promising Uruguayan side that could make a deep run in this tournament. I mean, the way they've shown up, they have a coach who is well known across Conembol as being a star man. He hasn't necessarily won the silverware to do it, but I mean, he's one of the iconic coaches of Conembol. And then we go to the U.S. men's national team. I think that the game against Colombia is a better judge of this U.S. men's national team than the game against Brazil. And I say that looking ahead at, obviously, we've got a group with Brazil and Colombia coming ahead. And I'm going to say a bold statement here. Argentina is the best team in South America right now. Uruguay is the second best. Colombia is the third best. Brazil is maybe the fourth best, but I think Ecuador, with the right upward trend, could pass them. But guaranteed, Brazil are not in the top 3 best teams in Conebol right now. It is evident. Let's save that for when we're talking about Brazil. But I say that now a little bit, give you that little snippet now, because we're talking about a U.S. team that played both Brazil and Colombia, 2 teams that they might face in the quarterfinals. And, they were thrashed by Colombia. It was poor at points. I don't expect the United States to go into a tournament looking as slow, lethargic, and rusty as they did against Colombia. They allowed all their goals in either the first 20 minutes or the last 20 minutes, and every single one of the goals they gave up came from a mistake playing out of the back. And against Brazil, they looked much better in both of those senses. That being said, Colombia pressed them really, really hard, and Brazil did not. Their press was unorganized, and it was easy to cut through. Colombia were organized, and they made it really difficult for the U.S. to play out of the back, which under Greg Berhalter, that's the way the U.S. want to play. It doesn't matter if they don't have the players. It doesn't matter if they're not as talented a team as some of the other teams they're going to play against. That's how they want to play. I think the pros for me going into it, I liked that Balogun didn't start the second game, the game against Brazil. I think that Pepe is the better player for a lot of these Copa America games. But I think the 2 of them should rotate. In my opinion, I think that Pepe is the right guy to go up against an Uruguay, while Balogun is the right guy to go up against Bolivia or Panama. But once we get to the quarterfinals, I think Pepe should be the guy. Looking at their lineup, I mean, There's only one problem I see right now with the U.S. men's national team, and that's in defense. But we'll not talk about that for a second. We'll leave that for last. Pulisic on the left, he's been sensational with AC Milan this year. He was in the Serie A team of the season. And then, like I just said, Balogun, he struggled for form, but I think Pepe and Balogun showed against Colombia and Brazil that they're really good players. The goal against Colombia came from a Balogun assist that was built between him and Haji Wright. And then against Colombia or against Brazil, Pepe was really good up top. I think he proved that he was a better choice up top. And then, looking on the right wing, Weah's going to be there. And then the midfield is sensational. You got 4 guys who could play in there with Yunus Musa, Gio Reyna, Weston McKennie, and Tyler Adams. I mean, they're all sensational. And the way I look at it right now, I think, obviously the U.S. is going to play 3 of them, 3 out of those 4. I think Gio Reyna has to be in there. And I think Weston McKennie has to be in there. And then the decision between the other 2 has to come down to fitness. Adams has been hurt. If Adams is healthy and ready to go, Adams plays for me. But if he's not, he's going to come off the bench to replace Musa. Musa and Adams, though, they're the 6. They're the one connecting it. And McKennie tends to play in that 8 role, and Reyna tends to push higher. But what I would like to see the U.S. do is play with 1 6 and 2 8s in this tournament, because of the way against Brazil, they had a lot more fight in them, the U.S., and Gio Reyna kind of dropped back into this 8 role and did a lot of defensive work. And that really actually connected the team well, kept the team connected from the defensive line to the midfielders, kept the midfielders connected to the forwards, and kept the team organized and compact. And I think that's a key. Unfortunately, because the whole team is young. The whole team is young. But Gio Reyna has had issues in the past. But I think he's the engine. I think he might be the most important player for this U.S. men's national team, because I think he's the piece that brings the whole team together. When he plays well, they play well. You look at the Nations League final, the most recent one against Mexico, they throttled them because Gio Reyna was sensational in that game. He won player of the tournament. But at the World Cup, at points, Gio Reyna wasn't playing, and the U.S. looked kind of flat. I feel like they lacked a cutting edge. But I think Gio Reyna's most important aspect comes in the point of connecting the midfield to the defense, because the defense isn't that great. Outside of Anthony Robinson, who's playing on the left, who was one of the best players in the Premier League this year, maybe the best left back in the Premier League. He won player of the season for Fulham. The center backs, I have questions. Tim Ream is getting old, and he played really poorly against Colombia. Chris Richards, I haven't seen him play too much. He doesn't get the minutes that you would hope an international player gets. And then maybe our best player in defense, Serginho Dest, is injured. He's not at the tournament. So it's going to be likely a Joe Scally. I would be inclined to say that Berhalter should play Yunus Musa back there. I think that would be a good option, or Tyler Adams, whichever he prefers. But to put one of those defensive midfielders into that right back position, I think would actually help really shore up the defense and help with the build-up play, which is something this team needs, because the center backs don't get enough minutes. The goalkeeper doesn't get enough minutes and isn't comfortable with the ball at his feet. I love Matt Turner. He's really good shot stopper, but he doesn't like the ball at his feet, and he needs to have the ball at his feet. So I think adding just another piece into the defense that you can trust. Scally was sensational. He shut down Vinicius Jr. and he shut down Luis Diaz. But I think the biggest problem for the U.S. is building out of the back. And I don't think Scally brings as much to the team building out of the back as an Adams or Musa would in that position. I've said a lot about the U.S. And like I said, the problems with playing out of the back and that defensive weakness. That's why I would like Reyna to drop back more, because I feel like he can kind of help out. I think the 3 in midfield don't need to have a specific 6, 8, 10 role. I think they should be constantly rotating, because I think that's how you build out of the back with the most success you can possibly get. But I'm not the coach, and I'm not sure that's how they're going to play. And because of that, I don't know that this is the tournament for them. I think that they need to realize that they have players with certain strengths and they have players with certain weaknesses, and they need to build a team around that, rather than, I feel like the current team is just doing, this is Greg Berhalter's word. You do it, you stew it, whatever it takes, do it. I don't think that's good coaching. I think as a coach, you have to change your system to work for your players because you have different players with different strengths and weaknesses. I don't think the U.S. is there yet. I think that this will be a wake-up call of a tournament. And honestly, looking forward to that 2026 World Cup, that might be something they need. That being said, Uruguay, obviously, I said they're the second best team in Conembol. And given that the U.S. just was thrashed by Colombia, I think on paper that game really should have been a 2-1 game for Colombia, but it was 5-1 in the end. And that's, you got to look at the scoreline. I think it's either a 3-1 or 2-1 if it was played how both teams deserved the result to go. But yeah, I'm going to put the U.S. second, and then I'm going to put Panama third, which brings us into, in my opinion, the most interesting group. And I've already talked a little bit about Brazil. The reason why I feel like they have weaknesses, I think, is in the coaching. Allison, they've also got Ederson, two defenders. I think Marquinhos is going to play. And then you've got, obviously, Gabriel has been sensational with Arsenal. I'm not sure if he'll play. The outside backs are what's going to get me, and I think that's another problem that Brazil have. That right back has been a revolving door since Dani Alves left, and then I think the left back has kind of become a similar problem since Marcelo has left. So those are two questions, but they're not necessarily the most important parts on the field. So continuing, still a lot of talent for this Brazilian team. Midfield is absolutely sensational. You've got Paqueta, you've got Guimaraes. He's been sensational. And then, looking at the attack, you've got Vinny Jr., you've got Rodrigo, you've got Richarlison, who, obviously he's not a potential starter for them, but there's a lot of talent on this Brazilian side. Not as much as in previous years, but it's still Brazil. It's still the team with the most World Cup wins ever. It's still maybe the most talented team in the world. It's still a team where a guy like Endrick has already been bought by Real Madrid at 19 years old. He's just playing in Brazil, and they're buying him already. He hasn't really proven himself. He's been bought because it's Brazil. They've got so much talent across the board all the time, and they've got this pedigree about them. And yet they sit sixth, I think, right now in current World Cup qualifying. Yes, sixth. They've got 2 wins in 6 games, 1 draw, and 3 losses. They have lost more than half their games in World Cup qualifying right now. This is not the Brazil I grew up watching. This is not the Brazil who everybody expected to win the 2022 World Cup, who everybody expected to win the 2018 World Cup, expected to win in 2014. It used to be the precedent that Brazil are in the tournament, they're winning the whole thing. That's not the case anymore. And I don't think it comes with the talent because, like I said, we're talking about guys who are playing on the biggest level across the world. I can name more Brazilians than I can Uruguayans or Ecuadorians, and yet they sit behind them in qualifying. And I think that's because Brazil have I think it's 2 pieces. Brazil's identity has been skillful and beautiful, attacking, creative play. And I think that style of play has died off a little bit. Not entirely, but I think the game over the past 10 years has become more and more tactically dominating. I think that's part of the reason you see a guy like Pep Guardiola have his dominance. I think that's why you see guys from the Pep Guardiola tree of coaching have such success, with the new Chelsea coach obviously having the success he had last year with Leicester. And then obviously Arteta has been sensational. Klopp's tactics have carried a Liverpool side that were mediocre while I was growing up to be a team that's constantly competing with a Manchester City giant. Ancelotti's tactics have been sensational. Tuchel's tactics turned a Chelsea team that is kind of mediocre and was mediocre after he left and was mediocre before he got there into a team that won the Champions League. So I think this game has become more tactical. And while I think that that doesn't suit Brazil's style, I also think that the current coaching staff for Brazil has fallen behind a little bit. And the reason I say that, watching them play against the United States, they tried to press them, and they were cut through like a hot knife through butter consistently by a U.S. men's national team back line that couldn't play out of the back for anything against Colombia. All 5 goals came from defensive mistakes playing out of the back. All 5. Go back and watch. Even the second goal, which came from a corner, if you look how they won that corner, is from Tim Ream giving it away. All 5 came from a midfielder, a defensive midfielder's mistake, a center back's mistake, an outside back's mistake, or a goalkeeper mistake in possession, giving it away and allowing Colombia to counterattack and score on them quickly. Brazil did it too. That's how Brazil got their goal. They counterattacked quickly. But their press was so unorganized that U.S. men's national team cut through them on a consistent basis. They're not organized. They don't know how to play as a team. Their press is in shatters right now, and they're not the type of team that's going to play a low block. And if you try and press and you're unorganized in your press, you are going to be punished time and time again. And the U.S. was constantly getting up against this Brazil side, which honestly to Brazil should be an embarrassment. Brings me to Colombia. Watching that game against the U.S. men's national team. Obviously, this is a Colombian side that sits second. They have 3 wins and 3 draws. They have yet to lose a game in Conembol qualifying, and they are on a long undefeated streak, which honestly I think it hurt them. But they're really talented. James Rodriguez has struggled at club level for years and years, but he has remained a constant for that Colombian national team. The likes of Juan Cuadrado are no longer in there, but you've got a Luis Diaz up there now that has been doing numbers for a Colombian team, despite the fact that, he's in and out of the Liverpool lineup. And again, I think it comes down to a coaching and a tactical thing. You look at a lot of these national teams that have success, and only a few of their players are really guys that are showing up at the club level consistently in Europe. And yet they're having consistent success because I think the coaches come in, they look at the team, they get to know their team, and they build a program that works for their team. And I think that's exactly what this Colombian squad has done. They didn't make it to the 2022 World Cup, and since then, they have been on a tear. They've been sensational. New coaching staff has really turned the program around, and I think they're the exact opposite situation that Brazil is in right now. They have an identity. They have a tactical identity, and they've bought into it, and they've got the players playing for the badge and really wanting to win. They're hungry. And Brazil just don't feel that way. So I'm just going to go ahead and do this now. Costa Rica and Paraguay, you could talk about them as well. Costa Rica's golden generation is kind of gone. The likes of Keylor Navas and Brian Ruiz and all those guys who went far in the 2014 World Cup, they're not there anymore. They've been okay, but they haven't had any really big wins. They beat the U.S. 2-0 when the U.S. had already essentially qualified for the World Cup. I mean, it didn't really matter. And then Paraguay, they're a really defensive team. They sit just ahead of Chile in qualifying. They've only got 1 win in qualifying, though, and 3 losses, and they've only scored 1 goal in all of qualifying. They've only allowed 3, so I think they could be a challenge, which is why I'm going to put them third. But I really don't think that either Costa Rica or Paraguay really have a chance in this group. Neither do I think Panama or Bolivia have a chance in the group above it, and neither do I think any of these teams in Group A have a chance of dethroning Argentina at the top. I think Argentina's getting first, no matter what. This is a toss-up. And then Uruguay and U.S., I think this is how it's going to go. Uruguay is going to be first, and U.S. is going to be second. The way these two finish, that's a toss-up. I think for sure that Colombia will finish first in this group. Brazil will finish second. This might be a toss-up, but I am very confident in the teams that I have going through and the order I have them going through, at least in Group C and D, and then Argentina, which allows me to just easily go ahead to this quarterfinals and see, Argentina's playing Mexico, a young Mexican side. Yeah, that's an easy one. Argentina will trounce them. If this is the game, Mexican fans, don't bother watching. It might be worse than that 7-1, 7-0 against Chile a few years ago. Brings me to this winner of Group B, second place in Group A. You got Ecuador and Chile. Chile's been really good recently, like I said, but I think the Ecuador team has more to play for. This is a young Chilean side in terms of their turnaround, and I think they still have some work to do and some building to do. And I think making it to this point would be seen as a positive for them. And I think losing here would be a way of saying, look, we still have work to do. We still have things to build on. We're not quite there yet. Versus this Ecuador team, I think they're ready to take the next step. And I think that next step is making it to the semifinals of the Gold Cup. I think Uruguay beats Brazil. And I think that this is the wake-up call that Brazil will need, because I think Uruguay will thrash them. I don't think Colombia will thrash Brazil in the group, but I think Uruguay, even if not on the scoreboard, maybe a 2-0 game where Uruguay completely dominates Brazil. Brazil need a wake-up call. And then, of course, I'm going to go again, group winner here. I don't see the U.S. men's national team coming back and playing Colombia again and getting any other result. I don't think it would be 5-1 again, but Colombia were by far the better team. And like I said, I think they're the third best team in Conebol, and Conebol is head and shoulders above Concacaf. And so I have my 4 semifinal teams, which, funny enough, I might argue those are the 4 best teams in South America right now, although I might switch out Brazil for Ecuador. But yeah, I have Brazil going out early, so quarterfinals for them. This is where it gets hard. I think Argentina is the easy choice here, but the Uruguay-Colombia game is a game that I don't really want to pick. And I've been going back and forth on it all day because I've known that these were going to be my semifinals all day. Like I said, I was really confident in Argentina winning the group. I was really confident in Uruguay winning the group and confident in Colombia winning the group, and was confident in both of them winning their quarterfinal games, and I was confident in Argentina winning both their quarterfinal and their semifinal game, no matter who they played. The first game that I have real question about in thinking about this, because I've been thinking about it all day, is this Uruguay-Colombia game. And it's really hard to call for me, especially because while I think this Uruguay team is better, I more recently watched a Colombia game than an Uruguay game, and man, were Colombia good. Colombia are on a tear recently. They haven't lost in a long time. This is tough. I think I am going to give the slight edge to Colombia. I don't know why, especially because going into this video, I really thought I was leaning towards Uruguay, but, my final decision is going to be that Colombia will beat Uruguay, and Argentina will be the semifinal. I think Uruguay will win this bronze final, although I think that having a third-place game is stupid and that we shouldn't have them. The players want to go home. They're disappointed that they lost. They don't want to have to play again. But the final is the one that matters. And despite the fact that I would be really excited to see the Colombians back on top like this, really pushing themselves as a South American giant, same with Uruguay, this Argentinian team is just sensational, and winning the Copa America for a second straight time with a World Cup in the middle. I don't think it's as impressive as when Spain went Euro, World Cup, Euro, but it's up there. And Messi has deserved international silverware for some time now, and I think the coaching problem and the guys around him, I think for years and years and years, that Argentinian team was just carried by Messi. They lacked an identity. They lacked tactics. They lacked organization, and they finally have it now. And the supporting cast around Messi is sensational. And I don't think Messi loses with a good supporting cast. I just don't think he does. So for me, that's how I'm going to end the tournament. We'll go ahead and do that save locally so that this will pop up with the nice, cool graphic that they give you. But yeah, that's how I have the Copa America going. I'll review this. I think once the group stages are over, I'll do a look back at this, and I'll do a group stage review and a knockout stage prediction. And also look forward to doing that with the Euros. The Euros have not gone exactly how I've predicted so far. It's, some of the things have been a little different. England have really disappointed me so far, but I look forward to making a video reviewing the group stages of the Euros and making Euros predictions. But until then, this has been Salibo Football. Make your predictions for this tournament down in the comments, and I'll see you for the next one.